The west coast of Ireland holds secrets darker than Atlantic storms. In the old country of County Mayo, where mist clings to ancient stone and turf smoke drifts from cottage chimneys, locals still whisper about a family that made the landscape itself afraid, the O'Malleys of Craigpatrick's shadow. Not the famous seafaring clan. These were different O'Malleys, the ones who never left the wetlands, the ones who fed on their own blood until the very soil turned sour. Between 1640 and 1710, when Cromwell's armies carved through Ireland and William of Orange seized the throne, a branch of the O'Malley lineage retreated deep into Mayo's most isolated bogs. What they became in those 70 years of isolation reads like folklore until you dig through parish records, coroner reports, and land surveys that document their twisted legacy. If you value documented Irish history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the National Archives of Ireland and Trinity College Dublin manuscripts. Now, back to the story. The Bog O'Malleys started as political refugees. Seamus O'Malley the Elder fled west in 1641 during the Confederate Wars, carrying his wife Bridget and 3 young sons into the trackless wetlands beyond Westport. Land records show he claimed a 100-acre spread of bog and scrubland that nobody else wanted. Ground too wet for crops, too isolated for trade, perfect for hiding. Seamus had fought at the Battle of Julianstown in November 1641, where Confederate forces routed English settlers fleeing Dublin. Contemporary accounts describe him as a minor chieftain commanding 12 men, skilled with both sword and musket. But when Cromwell landed in 1649 with 12,000 troops and siege artillery, even hardened fighters like Seamus knew the rebellion was finished. The smart ones ran. The stubborn ones died. The journey west took 18 days through territory controlled by English patrols and Irish collaborators. Bridget carried their youngest son, barely 2 years old, while Seamus and the older boys, Patrick and Cormac, drove a small herd of cattle and sheep through mountain passes and hidden valleys. They lost half their livestock to wolves and raids before reaching the Mayo coast. Seamus built his settlement like a fortress. Stone foundations sunk deep into the peat. Walls thick enough to stop musket balls, narrow windows that watched every approach. The family compound sat on the only dry ground for miles, connected to the outside world by a single causeway of stacked stones that vanished at high water. Archaeological surveys in 1984 found evidence of deliberate defensive planning. Hidden food stores, weapon caches, even a tunnel system beneath the main house. The tunnel network stretched for over 200 yards underground, connecting the main dwelling to 3 separate exits concealed in the surrounding bog. Stone-lined passages wide enough for a man to crawl through, with air shafts disguised as natural bog holes. Emergency food stores included sealed clay pots of preserved meat, dried fish, and oats that could sustain a family for months. Weapon caches held muskets, powder, shot, and dozens of pike heads wrapped in oiled leather. But isolation breeds its own madness. The first signs appeared within 5 years. Seamus began forbidding his sons from traveling to Westport for market days. He stopped accepting visits from neighboring families, even fellow refugees who shared his political sympathies. When Father Michael Flanagan arrived in 1646 to baptize the newest O'Malley infant, Seamus met him at the causeway entrance with a loaded musket and orders to leave. Flanagan's parish records, preserved in the Westport Church archives, describe the encounter in detail. Seamus appeared gaunt and suspicious, constantly scanning the horizon for threats that didn't exist. His speech had developed a peculiar cadence, rapid and disjointed, jumping between topics without connection. Most disturbing, he referred to his family members by numbers rather than names: first son, second son, the woman, as if their individual identities had become irrelevant. By 1660, the original three O'Malley brothers had taken wives from passing tinker families and refugee clans. The population of the bog settlement reached 27 souls, according to a parish census. Normal families would spread outward, seek new lands, marry into neighboring communities. The bog O'Malleys turned inward instead. The marriage arrangements grew increasingly strange. Patrick O'Malley, the eldest son, wed Moira Byrne, a tinker girl whose family had camped near the compound for winter shelter in 1658. But instead of leaving with her clan in spring, Moira remained in the bog settlement. Her family reported her missing to the Westport magistrate, claiming the O'Malleys had stolen her. When officials came to investigate, they found Moira heavily pregnant and insisting she had chosen to stay. She spoke in the same disjointed manner as her husband, referring to the outside world as the hungry place and the bog compound as the safe ground. Cormac O'Malley followed his brother's example in 1661, taking a wife from the Connolly clan of displaced farmers who had sheltered with the family during harsh winter months. But Mary Connolly's marriage certificate, filed with the church in Westport, contains unusual language. Instead of the standard religious vows, the document records a ceremony involving blood bonds and soil oaths, conducted by Seamus himself, who had begun acting as a self-appointed priest for his isolated community. Bridget O'Malley died in 1662. Her grave marker, discovered during peat cutting in 1971, shows signs of ritual, defacement, scratches, and marks that local archaeologists couldn't explain. The stone bears an inscription in Irish Gaelic that translates roughly as, "She feeds the ground that feeds us all." Below the text, someone carved crude symbols that don't match any known Celtic or Christian traditions. Archaeological analysis suggests the symbols were carved years after Bridget's death, possibly by multiple hands over an extended period. After her death, something shifted in the family's behavior. Marriage patterns, documented in church records, become impossible to follow. Brothers wed sisters, uncles took nieces. The family tree twisted into a genetic knot. The first recorded instance of sibling marriage occurred in 1664 when Patrick O'Malley's eldest daughter, Siobhan, wed her uncle Cormac after his first wife died in childbirth. Church records show Father Flanagan refused to perform the ceremony, but the marriage proceeded anyway under Seamus's authority. The couple produced 4 children over the next decade, all showing signs of developmental abnormalities, according to baptismal records that describe them as simple or touched by God's hand. By 1670, the second generation had begun intermarrying with systematic precision. Cousins wed cousins. Half-siblings produced offspring. The genetic pool contracted with each union. Parish records from this period become increasingly difficult to interpret as family relationships grow impossibly tangled. Names repeat across generations. Birth dates overlap in ways that suggest record-keeping errors or deliberate obscuration. By 1680, outsiders stopped visiting the bog compound entirely. The last recorded contact appears in a 1679 letter from Father Michael Flanagan, parish priest of Westport, who wrote, "The O'Malleys have fallen to practices most foul and unholy. I dare not return to bless their dead." The letter, preserved in Dublin's Trinity College archives, provides no details about what he'd witnessed during his final visit to the compound. Flanagan's personal diary, discovered in the church basement in 1967, offers more disturbing insights. His final entry about the O'Malleys, dated October the 12th, 1679, describes finding evidence of unnatural consumption during his visit. He mentions discovering bones picked clean in the family's refuse pit and witnessing children who spoke of meat that walked in tones that suggested perfect normalcy. Most troubling, he records seeing family members with teeth filed to points and hands stained with what appeared to be dried blood. The priest's account includes sketches of symbols he observed carved into the compound's walls and doors. The drawings match the mysterious markings found on Bridget O'Malley's gravestone, suggesting a consistent symbolic system had developed within the isolated community. Modern anthropologists who studied Flanagan's sketches identified elements similar to ritualistic markings found in cannibalistic cultures from Papua New Guinea and parts of the Amazon basin, though no historical connection could explain the similarity. The isolation deepened, trade stopped, contact ceased. For 30 years, the Bog O'Malleys lived as ghosts in their wetland fortress. During this period of complete isolation, the family developed their own internal economy based on resource conservation and recycling that extended to human remains. Archaeological evidence suggests they began systematically processing the bones of their dead into tools and ornaments. Excavations uncovered needles made from human finger bones, buttons carved from teeth, and decorative items fashioned from skull fragments. The practice likely began as practical necessity, but evolved into ritualistic behavior as the family's mental state deteriorated. Evidence also suggests the Bog O'Malleys developed their own linguistic variations during isolation. Fragmentary written records found in the compound ruins show a bastardized form of Irish Gaelic mixed with invented words and phrases. They created new terms for family relationships that reflected their complex inbreeding patterns, with single words describing connections like brother-father and daughter-sister-wife that standard language couldn't accommodate. Then came the famine winter of 1709. Ireland had endured brutal cold and crop failures for 3 consecutive seasons. The Great Frost, as historians now call it, brought the coldest winter in European memory. The River Thames froze solid in London. Wine turned to ice in French cellars. In Ireland, where potato cultivation hadn't yet taken hold and grain crops had failed repeatedly, starvation became endemic. Temperature records from Trinity College, Dublin, show the winter of 1709 achieved an average temperature 15 degrees below normal. Ice formed on the western coast bays that hadn't frozen in living memory. Livestock died in unprecedented numbers. Even wealthy landowners struggled to feed their households. In the bog country, where farming had never been viable, starvation hit like a plague. Contemporary accounts describe scenes of desperate hunger throughout County Mayo. Families boiled leather shoes and belts for sustenance. Parents abandoned children they couldn't feed. Bands of starving peasants raided granaries and killed livestock owners for their stores. The Westport Magistrate's records document over 200 deaths from starvation or exposure between December 1609 and March 1710. Coroner records from the spring of 1710 document what happened next to the Bog O'Malleys. Thomas Byrne, a turf cutter from Westport, discovered the first body while working the eastern edge of the O'Malley Bog on March 23, 1710. A human skeleton, stripped clean and split open, buried in a shallow grave of peat and stones. The bones showed knife marks consistent with butchering. The skull had been cracked open to extract the brain. The femur bones were split lengthwise to access the marrow. Even the smallest finger bones showed scoring marks from systematic meat removal. Byrne's account, recorded by the magistrate William Knox, describes finding additional bone fragments scattered throughout the peat bog. Human ribs mixed with sheep bones in what appeared to be communal refuse pits. Skull fragments bearing tool marks that suggested deliberate breaking. Most disturbing, children's bones showing the same butchering patterns as adult remains, indicating the family had consumed members regardless of age. Byrne reported his find to the county magistrate, William Knox, who organized a search party to investigate the O'Malley compound. The expedition included Knox himself, 2 constables, a military surgeon from Westport's small garrison, and 6 local men recruited as laborers and witnesses. They departed Westport on April 10, 1710, carrying supplies for 3 days and weapons in case they encountered hostile survivors. The journey to the bog compound took 6 hours through terrain that had become increasingly treacherous after decades of neglect. The stone causeway that once provided access to the settlement had partially collapsed, forcing the search party to wade through waist-deep bog water for the final approach. Knox's official report describes an eerie silence surrounding the compound. No bird songs, no insect sounds. Even the wind seemed muted by the oppressive atmosphere. Knox's official report, filed in Dublin on April 15, 1710, describes what they found in clinical detail. The compound held 14 living O'Malleys and the remains of at least 30 others. The survivors were skeletal, deformed, barely human. Generations of inbreeding had produced children with twisted limbs, clouded eyes, and minds that functioned like broken clockwork. They communicated in grunts and gestures. They moved like animals. The search party's military surgeon, Dr. James Morrison, conducted preliminary examinations of the surviving family members. His medical notes, preserved alongside Knox's report, document severe physical abnormalities consistent with extreme inbreeding, cleft palates that made speech impossible, limb deformities that prevented normal walking, visual impairments ranging from partial blindness to complete loss of sight. Several survivors showed signs of severe mental retardation, unable to respond to simple questions or demonstrate basic reasoning skills. Most disturbing, Morrison noted evidence of deliberate physical modifications. Several survivors had filed their teeth to sharp points, creating crude fangs suited for tearing raw meat. Others bore ritual scarification, covering their arms and faces in patterns that matched the symbols found throughout the compound. Some had severed their own fingers, apparently as part of religious ceremonies that involved offering body parts. to whatever twisted deity they had begun worshiping. But the living conditions revealed the true horror. Knox's report catalogs the evidence methodically. Human bones in the cooking pots still suspended over cold fire pits. Flesh drying on wooden racks constructed throughout the main dwelling and outbuildings. A cellar storage room stacked with dismembered bodies like cordwood, preserved in salt and peat to prevent spoilage. The survivors had been eating their own dead for years, maybe decades. When the dead ran out, they started eating the living. The compound's kitchen area contained the most damning evidence. Cooking implements designed specifically for processing human remains, knives with curved blades for separating joints, mallets for breaking bones, specialized cutting boards with grooves for collecting blood. Clay vessels held rendered human fat that had been carefully preserved for cooking and lighting. Smoking racks bore the residue of human flesh that had been cured like bacon or ham. Storage areas revealed the full scope of the cannibalistic operation. Separate rooms for different body parts, one for limbs, another for torsos, a third for heads and organs. Each storage area showed signs of systematic organization, with remains sorted by age sees an apparent quality. The family had developed industrial-level efficiency in processing their own members for consumption. The magistrate's men found children's bones split for marrow, adult skulls opened for brains, a baby's skeleton in a stew pot, tiny ribs scored with knife marks. The O'Malleys had devoured their own bloodline until only the most hardy and desperate remained. Evidence suggested that cannibalism had begun as a survival necessity during the harsh winter, but evolved into religious practice over subsequent months. Ritual arrangements of bones in the compound's central courtyard indicated the family had begun worshiping the act of consumption itself. Human skulls arranged in circles around fire pits. Femur bones planted upright in the ground like fence posts. Children's rib cages woven together into crude, decorative displays. The search party discovered a primitive chapel within the compound where the Bog O'Malleys conducted their twisted religious ceremonies. Human bones formed the altar. Dried human flesh hung like religious banners from the ceiling. The walls bore paintings created with human blood depicting scenes of family members consuming each other in acts that seemed celebratory rather than desperate. The imagery suggested cannibalism had become the central element of their perverted spiritual beliefs. Knox ordered the compound burned and the survivors transported to Dublin for trial. But the journey proved unnecessary. Within a week, all 14 remaining O'Malleys were dead. Disease, exposure, or simple inability to survive outside their bog fortress claimed them before they reached the city. The survivors' deaths occurred with suspicious rapidity and uniformity. All 14 died between April 20th and 27th, 1710, while being held in Westport's makeshift jail, pending transport to Dublin. Dr. Morrison's medical examination found no evidence of poison or violence. The Bog O'Malleys seemed to die from simple inability to exist in normal human society, as if their decades of isolation had made conventional life physiologically impossible. Several survivors refused all offers of normal food, apparently unable to digest anything except human flesh. Others died from infections that developed from their ritual scarification and dental modifications. The youngest victims, children estimated between 8 and 12 years old, showed signs of severe malnutrition despite having access to proper meals. Their bodies had apparently adapted to survive on human remains and couldn't process standard nutrition. Knox's final report includes a disturbing detail about the survivors' final days. Even while dying in custody, the Bog O'Malleys attempted to consume each other. Guards had to separate them after discovering one child chewing on another's infected wounds. An adult survivor was found trying to bite through the wrists of a dead family member. Their cannibalistic compulsions continued until the moment of death. If you value documented Irish history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the National Archives of Ireland and Trinity College Dublin manuscripts. Now, back to the story. The authorities tried to bury the scandal. Knox's report was filed in Dublin and forgotten. The burned compound was left to sink back into the bog. Local communities agreed never to speak of what had been discovered, but the physical evidence wouldn't disappear so easily. The cover-up involved multiple levels of Irish colonial administration. William Knox received orders from Dublin Castle to minimize public discussion of the incident, apparently to prevent panic about similar isolated communities throughout Ireland's remote regions. Church authorities refused to consecrate burial ground for the Bog O'Malleys, forcing their remains to be buried in unmarked graves outside Westport's cemetery walls. Local magistrates throughout County Mayo received instructions to investigate other isolated families and report any signs of similar practices. These investigations, documented in surviving correspondence from 1710 and 1711, revealed several smaller communities showing early signs of the same problems that had destroyed the Bog O'Malleys: excessive inbreeding, withdrawal from normal society, suspicious dietary practices, and the development of bizarre religious beliefs focused on consumption and sacrifice. Most troubling, the investigations uncovered evidence that the Bog O'Malleys had maintained limited contact with these other isolated communities, possibly spreading their cannibalistic practices through a network of hidden families scattered throughout Ireland's most remote regions. Trading records show unusual transactions involving preserved meat and bone implements between the bog compound and at least 3 other locations during the 1690s. In 1984, archaeologist Dr. Sarah Murphy led an excavation of the former O'Malley site during a dry summer that lowered the water table. Her team uncovered foundations, artifact caches, and human remains that confirmed the magistrate's 1710 report in disturbing detail. Murphy's excavation revealed the compound's layout with precise accuracy. The main dwelling measured 42 feet by 28 feet, built of dry stone construction with walls 3 feet thick at the base. Attached buildings included storage structures, workshops, and the ritualistic chapel described in Knox's report. The entire complex was surrounded by a stone wall 8 feet high with defensive positions designed for musket firing. Underground, the tunnel system proved even more extensive than Knox had documented. Ground-penetrating radar revealed passages extending over 400 yards from the main compound, connecting to hidden entrances throughout the surrounding bog. Some tunnels led to concealed food storage areas that still contain preserved human remains after nearly 3 centuries. Others connected to observation points that provided commanding views of all approaches to the settlement. The bone analysis revealed the full scope of the family's genetic collapse. DNA testing showed impossible levels of inbreeding. Genetic diversity so low that the final generation was essentially clones of their common ancestors. Physical deformities matched historical accounts of severe developmental disabilities, but the cut marks on the bones told the darker story. Modern forensic analysis identified tool marks on over 90% of recovered bone fragments, indicating systematic butchering had become the default method for handling all dead family members. The marks showed an increasing sophistication over time, suggesting the Bog O'Malleys had developed specialized techniques for processing human remains that improved their efficiency and yield. Comparison with animal bones found at the site revealed that the family had applied traditional Irish butchering methods to human remains, treating their dead relatives with the same systematic approach used for cattle and sheep. This professional-level butchering skill indicated that cannibalism wasn't desperate improvisation, but methodical practice that had been refined through years of experience. Murphy's team found evidence of systematic cannibalism spanning at least 4 decades. Adults, children, infants, all showed signs of deliberate butchering. The bones had been cracked for marrow extraction using techniques that suggested long practice. Some remains showed signs of being stored in salt or dried for preservation. Chemical analysis of bone samples revealed seasonal patterns in the cannibalistic behavior. Human consumption peaked during winter months when other food sources were scarce, but continued year-round at lower levels. This suggests the Bog O'Malleys had transitioned from survival cannibalism to dietary preference, consuming human flesh even when alternatives were available. The preservation techniques showed remarkable sophistication. The family had developed methods for smoking, salting, and drying human flesh that could keep meat edible for months. They created specialized storage areas with controlled humidity and temperature that maximized preservation efficiency. These techniques represented generations of accumulated knowledge about processing and storing human remains. The site yielded over 300 human bone fragments, representing at least 47 individuals. Population genetics suggested the Bog O'Malleys had devoured roughly 60% of their own clan before the final survivors died out. Age analysis of the consumed remains revealed horrifying patterns. The Bog O'Malleys showed no preference based on age or relationship. They consumed infants, children, adults, and elderly family members with equal systematic thoroughness. Evidence suggested they had developed rotation systems for selecting victims, possibly using ritualistic methods to determine which family member would be killed and consumed next. Several bone samples showed signs of healing from previous injuries, indicating some victims had survived initial attacks and lived for extended periods while being gradually consumed. The family apparently practiced a form of sustained cannibalism where victims were kept alive while portions of their flesh were systematically removed for food. But the most disturbing discovery came from the compound's central hearth. Beneath layers of ash and peat, Murphy's team found a cache of children's bones arranged in ritual patterns. Tiny skulls placed in circles, infant ribs stacked like kindling. The arrangement suggested something beyond simple cannibalism, evidence of ritualistic behavior that had evolved from desperate hunger into religious practice. The ritual deposit showed clear evidence of repeated ceremonies over extended time periods. Multiple layers of arranged bones separated by deposits of ash and ceremonial objects suggested the Bog O'Malleys had conducted regular ritualistic consumption of their youngest family members. The positioning of remains followed consistent patterns that indicated established religious practices rather than random arrangements. Carbon dating placed the ritual deposits between 1690 and 1705, during the family's final generation. The Bog O'Malleys hadn't just eaten their own children, they had worshipped the act. Comparative analysis with known cannibalistic cultures revealed similarities to ritualistic practices from isolated island communities in the Pacific and remote tribal groups in South America. The Bog O'Malleys had independently developed religious systems that paralleled documented anthropological examples of cannibalistic worship, suggesting these behaviors emerge naturally in isolated human populations under specific stress conditions. Local folklore, collected by the Irish Folklore Commission in the 1930s, preserves fragments of the O'Malley legend in songs and stories. Children's rhymes warn about the hungry family that lives in the western bogs. Fishermen's tales describe voices calling from the mist on foggy nights. Turf cutters still report finding bone fragments in the peat around the old compound site. Modern collection efforts by folklorists have uncovered over 30 separate traditional songs, stories, and sayings that reference the Bog O'Malleys or similar cannibalistic families in Ireland's remote regions. These oral traditions, preserved across centuries, contain remarkably accurate details about the historical family's practices and location, suggesting local communities maintained detailed knowledge of the events despite official attempts at suppression. Some folklore describes the Bog O'Malleys as supernatural beings, vampires or demons that fed on human flesh and could not die by normal means. Other traditions treat them as cautionary tales about the dangers of isolation and inbreeding. Most disturbing, several folk stories describe the Bog family as still active, continuing their cannibalistic practices in hidden locations throughout Western Ireland. The bog itself seems to remember. Botanical surveys show the area around the O'Malley ruins remains ecologically distinct from surrounding wetlands. Plant growth is stunted. Wildlife avoids the region. The water runs darker, tastes different. Local residents claim the bog won't burn properly. That turf cut from the O'Malley ground produces weak flames and bitter smoke. Scientific analysis has confirmed some of these folklore claims. Soil samples from the former compound site show elevated levels of phosphorus and nitrogen consistent with extensive decomposition of organic matter, likely from the large quantities of human remains that were processed there. The chemical composition of bog water near the site differs measurably from surrounding areas, with higher acidity and unusual mineral concentrations. Wildlife surveys document significantly reduced animal populations within a 2-mile radius of the old compound. Birds avoid nesting in the area. Fish populations in nearby streams show lower than normal numbers. Even insects seem less abundant, creating an ecological dead zone that persists 3 centuries after the O'Malley family's extinction. modern genetic analysis of preserved tissue samples has revealed the final twist in the O'Malley saga. The bog family carried genetic markers for Huntington's disease, a degenerative neurological condition that causes progressive mental deterioration, behavioral changes, and physical decline. The disease runs in families and becomes more severe with each generation of inbreeding. Huntington's disease symptoms include increased aggression, loss of impulse control, and changes in dietary behavior that could explain the family's transition to cannibalism. The condition also causes progressive loss of cognitive function that would have made rational decision-making increasingly difficult as the disease advanced through successive generations of the isolated family. The Bog O'Malleys weren't just starving cannibals. They were victims of inherited madness that grew stronger as their genetic diversity collapsed. The final generation was likely suffering from severe neurological degeneration that made rational thought impossible. Their cannibalistic practices may have been driven as much by brain disease as by hunger, but knowing the cause doesn't make the evidence less horrifying. The Bog O'Malleys consumed their own bloodline with methodical precision over 70 years. They turned family love into literal consumption. They transformed their compound into a charnel house where children fed on their parents and parents devoured their young. The last entry in Thomas Knox's official report, dated May 3, 1710, provides a final glimpse into the magistrate's state of mind after investigating the compound. He wrote, "I have served the Crown in Ireland for 20 years and witnessed the worst excesses of war and rebellion, but nothing in my experience prepared me for the evil that flourished in that cursed bog. May God grant that such abomination never again take root in Christian soil." Knox was wrong about one thing. The evil didn't die with the Bog O'Malleys. In 2006, construction workers building a new road through the Mayo wetlands uncovered a mass grave containing 43 human skeletons. The bones showed the same butchering marks found at the O'Malley compound. Carbon dating placed the burials between 1710 and 1720, a decade after the Bog family supposedly died out. DNA analysis of the road construction discovery revealed genetic markers matching the Bog O'Malley lineage. Somewhere in the Irish wetlands, members of the cannibalistic family had survived Knox's investigation and continued their practices for at least another generation. The hungry family had found a way to endure. The road construction was quietly halted. The mass grave was reburied under official secrecy orders that remain classified today. Local residents report that the new road section frequently floods despite proper drainage, as if the bog itself rejects the intrusion. Drivers describe strange sounds from the wetlands at night, voices calling in Irish Gaelic, asking for meat that walks and blood that flows. Somewhere in the Mayo bogs, the O'Malley hunger persists.